In this series of videos, I shall give you an overview of the patterns of the spoken verb tenses in French, except for the passé composé, as I feel that there are not enough patterns in that particular one that would fit into this series. Some of you may have looked in a book of verbs and may feel intimidated by all the words associated with just one verb, but if you know the patterns, then there is a lot less to learn. I hope that by pointing them out, your mind will register them when learning new verbs, which should make them easy to remember as they look familiar. I find that the patterns are more apparent in the spoken language than in writing, so it may be helpful to read out the conjugations of new verbs that you learn. There are lots of regular verbs which follow regular patterns, so you can guess all of the tenses without learning any exceptions. There are similar ones that sound regular, with spelling changes in order to maintain certain sounds. When you read or say them, you shouldn't need to think about it. It's only when you spell them that you need to work out the changes. For example, je mange, nous mangeons. Je commence, nous commençons. There are irregular verbs which are ones that break the rules. Many of them are common verbs and I will not be covering all of them in this video as this will take far too much time, although even then, some of them can often use some sort of pattern too, as we will see in the present tense. Now, when saying anything in a foreign language, you should be aware of what you mean in English first, instead of reacting to certain key words. For example, if I said, when they were young, they would swim every day. This means when they were young, they used to swim every day. Some of you may immediately jump on the word would and think you are talking about a condition, when actually I would use what is called the imperfect tense in that particular example. Try to develop a feeling of what you mean, which is useful when selecting a past tense, regardless of the words you use. This brings me on to another point. I don't believe you should focus on grammatical terms too much. I'll be using them for people who want them, but it is more useful to be able to use a screwdriver rather than just knowing the word for one. It should be sufficient, at least initially, to have a feel for the type of word. I shall also be giving them more meaningful terms such as the had tense or the descriptions tense, which for me makes things easy to remember and understand. Before I start, I wish to explain that I call the nous and vous forms the long forms and the others the short forms to highlight the differences, because the long forms seem to act differently to the others. I will also refer to the il, elle form as the they form to try to avoid confusion with he and she, il and elle. In a sentence, you should be able to work out what the speaker means, but if I just said il parle, you are unable to know if I mean he speaks or they speak. I'm going to briefly go over the endings of the regular ER verbs first, and then instead of delineating all of the irregular endings of the others, I will show you the general pattern that many non-ER verbs follow, which I hope will help you remember new verbs that you learn. To conjugate certain tenses, you take off the last two letters and add endings. The regular ER verbs have three sounds, one for the short forms and two for the long ones. We shall start with the conjugation of parler. For all of the short forms, the verb sounds the same. Je parle, tu parles, il, elle, on parle. Notice that there is an S for the tu form, which is a common pattern. For they speak, at the bottom there, it is il or elle parle. Note the silent ENT ending. Incidentally, on parle can be translated as we speak instead of using the nous form, but I will still translate on as one so as not to get it confused with the nous form. As you can hear, all those conjugations have the same sound even though the spellings are different. The long forms are nous parlons and vous parlez. Now what I want to show you is this table. The general pattern for many of the other verbs is shown here. The je form and the tu form end in s. The he, she, one form ends in t. I remember a little phrase from a Michel Thomas course that I listened to many years ago. He and she for t. You can use this to remember that the ending is t for the he and she form. If there is a d already there, such as il comprend, then you do not end it with a T. The long forms still end in ONS and EZ as usual. The they form can usually be guessed by looking at the consonant used on the long forms, if there is one, and using that to modify the he, she form. I will show you what I mean. I shall use the irregular verb boire. We have je bois, tu bois, il, elle, on boit. The long forms are nous buvons and vous buvez, which start with a different sound from the others. Notice that there is a V before the endings which we can use for the they form. We take il boit, which means he drinks, and use the V by saying it at the end. Ils boivent. Let's try it with the regular verb vendre. We have je vends, tu vends, il, elle, on vend. As there is a D there, I do not attach a T. The long ones are nous vendons, vous vendez. This has a letter D before the endings. I will use this to change ils vont to ils vendent. Not every verb has a consonant we can use. Looking at rire, we see that the long forms are nous rions and vous riez. So we just have il rit for he laughs and il rit for they laugh, both sounding the same. I wish to stress that this is a general pattern, so there are some very irregular verbs which have unexpected endings, so certain tricks won't work, such as the verbs être, avoir and aller. To finish this section off, I shall show you the regular IR verb endings. I shall choose finir to conjugate. As you can see, there is a letter I which is used in the endings. A lot of the forms sound the same. Je finis and tu finis are spelt exactly the same. They sound the same as il, elle, on finit, which ends in a T as before. The long forms have ISS, nous finissons, vous finissez. As they use the consonant S, you could have used this to guess the they form by taking il finit and changing it to ils finissent. As you can see, that trick is easier in the spoken language rather than the written one, as you can just vocalise a consonant at the end to guess the they form. Imperfect tense is what I think of as the descriptions tense, as it can describe something in the past without actually being clear about whether an event finished or not. It can also translate used to, as in I used to swim when I was young. This tense also has three main sounds, one for the short forms, a, and two for the long ones, ion, ie. Notice that the je and tu forms share the same ending, and the il, elle, on form still ends in a T as before. You can make this tense by simply taking the nous form of a verb, removing ONS, and then add the endings. Here is an example. Let's take the irregular verb prendre. We use nous prenons and remove the ONS, which gives us PREN. We can put the endings on the end of this, which gives us je prenais, tu prenais, il, elle, on prenait, nous prenions, vous preniez, and il or elle prenait. There is only one exception with this method, and that is with the verb être. You have to use E with an accent and T, then add the endings as before. J'étais, tu étais, il, elle, on était. The they form is ils étaient or elles étaient. Apart from that liaison, all those have the same sound. The long forms are nous étions and vous étiez. I want to show you one more example from the verb avoir. Taking nous avons and removing ONS, we can add the endings. J'avais, tu avais, il, elle, on avait, nous avions, vous aviez, and ils or elles avaient. The reason I wanted to show you those is that we can use them to form another tense, the pluperfect. I like to think of this as the had tense, as in I had completed my work before I left. It is used to show that one event happened further back in time than another. For those that know about the past participle, you can use those imperfect tense versions of être and avoir with it. For example, tu étais parti quand je suis arrivé. You had left when I arrived. J'avais mangé avant de partir. I had eaten before leaving. If I said j'ai mangé, then this means I have eaten. I like to think of it as moving the have part further back in time by replacing j'ai with j'avais. Well, I feel like this is quite enough information for one video. Thank you for watching.